As a person who has been on YouTube for decades now, I am vaguely aware of other YouTubers who are, unlike me, successful on this platform. They show up on my feed sometimes sandwiched between true crime police interrogation videos and old men giving gardening tips on how to improve my bean harvest, which I say in a mocking tone, but I actually really like those ones. And sometimes I decide to actually watch these popular YouTubers, and sometimes I actually really like them. One of the latter cases is Moist Critical, aka Charlie, who is an affable and intelligent guy who comments on things that I would otherwise remain completely oblivious to. And I've seen a number of his videos, but I've never felt the need to comment on any of them until this very day when I watched this video about how cringe is unforgivable. In that video, Charlie's main thrust is that people seem to respond to cringe in a really over-the-top and often angry way compared to the way they might react to someone doing genuinely terrible things to other people. Cringe hurts no one usually, but it causes us all to lose our collective minds. And Charlie points out that this isn't just an internet problem.
And I guess it's honestly not even fair to say that it's just the internet that has no forgiveness for cringe, because one of the best examples of an entire career being unraveled from something being a little too goofy actually comes from 2004 and predates the modern internet as we know it. Howard Dean and the now infamous Dean Scream. Howard Dean was a very prominent political figure and in 2004 was a presidential candidate. And his entire world got fucking blasted when he was doing a rally and got a little too excited. He was given a very passionate speech. He's like, we're going to Washington, we're going to Oregon, then we're going to my buddy Eric's place to eat some ice cream, and then we're looping back around, we're going back to Washington, and then Oregon. And that moment, that one silly little screech ruined his entire presidential run and made him a laughingstock, all from just a droplet of cringe. I actually think he was a pioneer who was ahead of his time, because if he did that today, he'd be looked at as like an icon on TikTok, because that kind of shit's not cringy per se anymore. But anyway, the point I'm making here is it might not even just be an internet-specific phenomenon. It might be like a human-specific thing where we're just hardwired to dislike cringe and always hold it against the person who made us feel the cringe. I don't really know. I'm getting scientific about something that has absolutely no basis in science.
I found a few things really interesting here that I wanted to comment on because, in fact, scientists have done a lot of research on cringe, and researchers across a number of disciplines have now looked into why we hate cringe, why we love cringe, why we cringe at all, every aspect of this. But before I get into it, as an elder millennial, or as I prefer to think of myself, an infantile Gen Xer, Charlie has repeated a common misconception about Howard Dean. Howard Dean's Scream did go viral, and in fact, it might have been the first political meme of the nascent internet era, and he really was mocked viciously for it. And yeah, it probably did contribute in some way to his political downfall, but it actually happened, that scream happened the night that Dean lost the Iowa caucus, where he had basically gone all in and was considered the Democratic frontrunner. But he came in third, which meant that his presidential run at that point was pretty much over. His campaign had already been plagued with many mistakes prior to that caucus, all while the establishment Dems did their best to smear Dean as an angry, unpredictable, crazy man. You might recognize that play from establishment Democrats treating Bernie Sanders to the same sort of thing a few years ago. Even back then, they just didn't like a Democrat coming in, wanting to give everybody health care and, pull us out of a forever war and excite people and make them feel like their individual votes mattered. It's been a running theme for the past several decades. So Howard Dean's weird little scream wasn't actually even audible to the audience at the time because they were so loud. That's why it sounds so weird. He couldn't even hear himself, but it was picked up by the microphones that the press had set up. And this was basically a gift to the media and to the establishment Dems. And it helped put that final nail in the Dean campaign's forever box. Interestingly, years later, Dean would tell 538 that his team knew that his passion was being spun by the media, by the establishment as anger and too much. So he actually did try to tone down and be more boring and more like what people expected a politician at the time to be. But then he found he just couldn't do it. He wasn't being his true self, so he stopped trying. So yeah, like the passion, the excitement, the weird little happy yells, they went against the establishment, against the way we expected a serious politician at the time to act. And so at the time, yeah, it was seen as being cringy. And that's just one of several acceptable definitions for something that makes us cringe. Seeing someone violate social norms that's going to cause them some sort of social cost, that's what makes us cringe. But why is that? For decades now, psychologists have explored this question of embarrassment and shame and why we might feel those emotions when we aren't even involved in a situation. The hypothesis is that these emotions are actually much more complicated than basic emotions like happiness or anger. The reason is that shame, embarrassment, cringe, these are social emotions. Humans are extremely social animals, and so we have this set of emotions that we seem to have evolved as a way to keep our pack happy. These emotions rely upon our possibly unique ability to be empathetic, to put ourselves in another person's shoes and imagine how we would feel if we were experiencing the same emotions or even the same physical experiences as them. For instance, if I'm looking at a picture of a cute puppy, I might feel joy, but I will feel that without the need to put myself in the environment with the puppy in my imagination. I just look at the picture, oh, cute puppy, joy. But if I see somebody with spinach in their teeth, I feel this immediate shame and embarrassment because of my empathy, because I'm putting myself in that person's place. For that reason, cringe is a really fascinating area of study because you cannot cringe without having that automatic empathetic response. It just happens without you even thinking about it. You are immediately putting yourself in another person's shoes and thinking about how you would feel. Like a psychopath probably doesn't cringe very much because they lack that kind of empathy. And while we often think of empathy as being the opposite of what I'm about to say, that also means that cringe is very egocentric. You aren't cringing because another person is embarrassed themselves. You're cringing because you are embarrassed to be in that same position. And in many cringe situations, it becomes even more egocentric than empathetic, as in a case where you see a person with spinach in their teeth that they don't know about. They currently are not feeling any kind of embarrassment because they don't know about the spinach. So you're not feeling their feelings. You're feeling what you would feel like to know that you have spinach in your teeth. What I've noticed popping up again and again in all of the literature on this topic is best summed up by the abstract of this study that observed groups of women watching each other doing embarrassing things. Empathetic embarrassment for others was clearly subjective, depending more on who was watching than on who was being watched. The psychologist Philippe Rochat suggests that our automatic response to cringe is either contempt or compassion, and which one you go with is entirely dependent upon you, the cringer, and not the person at whom you are cringing. And what exactly does it say about you if your immediate gut reaction to seeing something cringy is to feel contempt? Well, probably means you're insecure in society. A person who feels safe and secure in their position in society will either not find the supposed embarrassing act cringy at all, or else they will respond with compassion in an attempt to help the person who is being cringed at not lose social status. Consider Billy Madison as an example, the titular character played by Adam Sandler, who has to go back to elementary school as an adult. When one of his new little kid friends has an accident and pees himself on a class trip, instead of showing contempt and mockery, Billy is secure enough to instead feel compassion for his friend, and he goes and makes peeing your pants the socially acceptable choice. All of which brings me back to Charlie's original question. Why does cringe seem to bring out the worst in people? Why can't we just let embarrassing people be embarrassing? Because people are insecure and desperate to show that they would never behave in such a status-losing way, they log onto TikTok or Reddit or wherever to tell the embarrassing person to unalive themselves or whatever. But what they're really telling themselves is that they're good enough. They're reassuring themselves that this will never happen to them, that they are better, that they are secure. But if you have to tell yourself that, you're probably not. And it sucks because not only are the targets of their abuse worse off for it, but society is worse off for it as well. Like, yeah, in general, there are social norms that we want to hold up. You know, feel free to feel cringe-induced contempt for the Ricky Gervaises of the world who punch down with terrible jokes. And I don't mean his character on The Office. These days, I mean Ricky Gervais himself. But there are loads of social norms that do need shaking up. Things like gender norms or just being an excited little nerd about something. Charlie mentions that he doesn't think Howard Dean's Scream would be considered cringy today, and I think he's right. And I think the reason for that is in part because Dean helped change social norms so that we are more forgiving about a progressive politician, and maybe we're more forgiving about who we consider to be a serious politician. But now that I say that out loud, I realize that maybe that's not actually a good thing. Anyway, the take home here is this. The way you respond to cringe tells us more about you than it does about the person creating the cringe. Keep that in mind the next time you want to attack somebody for being a little too weird. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.